Let's start with the mildest contradictions and move on to the ones that break the whole doctrine. 10. Gambling, smoking, and marrying in the Lord. If you ask Jehovah's Witnesses why they remove and shun people, they'll shrug it off by saying that they simply do what the Bible says. They will list this Bible verse that tells people in a congregation to remove a sinner from among them, and then they will list this other Bible verse that recounts all of the sins worth removing someone over, and then close the Bible and pretend they won. Except Jehovah's Witnesses also remove and shun people for gambling and for smoking. Gambling and smoking are not in the list of sins worth removing someone over. They are not even condemned by the Bible whatsoever, even though people in biblical times definitely gambled and smoked more than tobacco. Jehovah's Witnesses will say it's all about principles and that the Bible says you shouldn't do anything to hurt your body and blah blah blah. But first, the Bible does talk against gluttony, and despite sugar being in some ways as dangerous as tobacco, Jehovah's Witnesses do not have any issues ignoring those Bible verses. And second, because they have to reach and read into the Bible to justify shunning for cigarettes and for gambling. But you know what the Apostle Paul directly condemned in the Bible? Marrying outside the Lord. And yet, when it comes to going against what the Bible instructs Christians to do, marrying an unbeliever is not under the list of sins that will get you removed from the congregation, despite being directly condemned by the Bible. Why are they willing to ignore this command and yet make up new commands to remove and shun people? 9. Jesus chose Jehovah's Witnesses in 1919. According to Jehovah's Witnesses, Jesus came back to earth in 1919, checked all religions, and found that only the Jehovah's Witnesses were teaching the truth. That's when Jesus chose the Jehovah's Witnesses to become Jehovah's channel of communication. Except this religion has almost nothing to do with the religion that Jesus would have found in 1919. That religion was being led by Joseph Rutherford, a fake judge who preached that the end of the world would happen during 1925. The religion that Jesus found would have believed that Palestine was going to be reestablished in 1925, which is when the resurrection would happen and when the earth would be restored into a paradise. That is why one of their core beliefs was millions now living will never die, because they believed their generation was the generation that would not pass away. They were still celebrating Christmas, they were self-proclaimed Zionists, and had pyramidology teachings at the center of their religion. But all of those Jehovah's Witnesses have all passed away since, including Rutherford and the religion he led. Nowadays, the religion teaches drastically different things. Not only is this religion completely unrecognizable from the religion that Jesus would have found in 1919, the religion that Jesus would have found was teaching the right things is also long dead. If Jesus found and approved this religion and its leaders back in 1919, then why is this religion teaching almost none of the teachings that they taught back then? Wouldn't that mean that Jesus has not approved anyone living to be his channel of communication? 8. No collections taken. We do not tithe, charge dues, or take up collections. Although the costs of supporting our evangelizing work are high, we do not solicit money. Over a century ago, the second issue of the Watchtower magazine stated that we believe that we have Jehovah as our backer, and that we will never beg nor petition men for support, and we never have. Our activities are supported by voluntary donations. That is what the Jehovah's Witnesses were writing in 2014, that they would never ever beg for money and that they would rather close shop before sinking to those depths. Fast forward just a couple of years, and we got constant reminders to donate money.
We in no way want to be categorized with other organizations, religious and otherwise, that coerce their supporters to donate.
However,
not only reminders, but you can now hook up your card for monthly automatic donations if you want. And did you know that donating money is so important that even refugees in Jehovah's Witness dramas donate money to jw.org? Many kingdom halls proudly show a no collection taken sign, but now more congregations show a sign on how to donate to jw.org. I wonder if your kingdom hall had a no collections taken sign and you get a donated in jw.org sign. Do you take off the no collections taken sign and replace it with the donate in jw.org sign? Or do you just place those two up side by side and hope nobody sees the contradiction? 7. Selling dedicated kingdom halls. The Bible is very clear when it comes to what you can and cannot do with real estate that you've already dedicated to God. But no devoted thing that a man devotes unconditionally to Jehovah from his belongings may be sold or bought back, whether from mankind or animals or the field he possesses. Every devoted thing is something most holy to Jehovah. This Bible verse is conveniently forgotten by Jehovah's Witnesses because what they do with kingdom halls is exactly what this Bible verse condemns: selling them. This verse is very clear. Nothing you dedicate to God, whether animals or real estate, can be sold. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses will say that this is the Old Testament and that they know that things are only holy while they are used with a holy purpose, like wine stops being holy when the memorial ends. But isn't that convenient? Not only because that's completely absent from the Bible, but because that's only applicable to dedicated items but not dedicated people. You can't just say that you were dedicated to God for a while when you were a Jehovah's Witness and now you're not and you're just chilling. When it comes to people getting dedicated, then dedication becomes a prison that you cannot escape from. You got baptized when you were 12, which means you must obey whatever the governing body says the rules are for the rest of your life, regardless of whether they completely change the rules and make them the opposite of what they were when you got baptized. But when it comes to kingdom halls, well, this dedication verse is Old Testament, and the governing body can sell as much dedicated real estate that it was built for and paid for by their followers and pocket their profit. 6. Shunning sinners forever. Jehovah's Witnesses shun people, and as I just explained before, that's justified by them simply claiming that they follow what's in the Bible. And there's this Bible verse that says, remove the sinner from among yourself, and that's a command for everyone, don't look it up. Except that's in the first letter to the Corinthians. The second letter to the Corinthians, written just a few months later, has Paul backtracking a lot of what he said in the first one. Concretely, he tells the Corinthians to love the sinner. This rebuke given by the majority is sufficient for such a man. Now you should instead kindly forgive and comfort him so that he may not be overwhelmed by excessive sadness. I therefore exhort you to confirm your love for him. Remember that guy that Paul told people to remove in the first letter to the Corinthians? He's talking about the same guy. Jehovah's Witnesses agree to this fact, and yet Jehovah's Witnesses don't love sinners as soon as they've stopped sinning. That's because Paul was telling the Corinthians to remove the person among themselves because the person was sinning constantly and out in the open, screwing his stepmom, and Christians were completely accepting that. Paul here is telling people to stop accepting a guy who is openly and unashamedly sinning, and to prove it, the second letter specifies that they need to love him because the majority had stopped associating with him, and that had been enough. The man was no longer sinning. Therefore, according to Paul, the Corinthians needed to immediately embrace him so he wouldn't be consumed by sadness. This is completely the opposite of what Jehovah's Witnesses do, since the sinner will be shunned even when they're no longer committing the sin, and will be removed and shunned by the entire Jehovah's Witnesses until the sinner goes back to the elders, asks to be reinstated, and goes to the meetings frequently for a while to prove that they want to be reinstated. If the sinner was sinning today, he would not be loved back into the congregation the moment he stopped sinning. He would have to endure shunning, then ask to be reinstated, and then endure shunning some more. 5. The name Jehovah. If you ask any Jehovah's Witness what the name of God is, they will happily tell you that it's Jehovah. After all, it says so in their Bible. The name Jehovah is so important that restoring it is one of the biggest achievements of this religion, since they inserted it not just in the Old Testament, but even in the New Testament, where the Tetragrammaton doesn't even appear. Preaching and restoring the name Jehovah is so important that no Jehovah's Witness will ever refer to God through a different name like Yahweh. After all, they are Jehovah's Witnesses. If you ask Jeffrey Jackson, learning that name is so important that it's the very first step of getting to know God.
Knowing God's personal name, Jehovah, is closely tied in with glorifying his reputation. In fact, knowing Jehovah's name is the very first step in that process.
And since they're the only ones doing that first step, this restoration and exaltation of the name Jehovah is one of the main reasons why Jehovah's Witnesses believe that their religion is the one true religion. Except there's just one issue with that. Jehovah is definitely not God's name. The name Jehovah only existed until the Middle Ages, when the Masoretes decided that nobody could pronounce the name of God. To remind everyone of that, they wrote the name of God combining the Tetragrammaton with the vowels of Adonai to create this hybrid monster word. This monster made-up word was a reminder that this is where the name of God was written. But then, in the 19th century, some Christians misunderstood the whole thing and started printing Bibles with the monster, non-pronounceable name as the name of God for a while. By the time Charles Taze Russell was starting his movement, the name Jehovah was already going out of favor, but Charles just so happened to use a Bible translation that still used that name, and since his thing was that religion was dumb and corrupted, then his followers started using the same translation he did. When the movement consolidated, everyone was using the translation with the wrong name for God. And when they decided to come up with their own Bible, Rutherford had already renamed the movement to Jehovah's Witnesses, so they weren't going to start using a more accurate name now. However, the name Yahweh is the most accurate transliteration of the name, a fact that even Jehovah's Witnesses have agreed to. Yahweh is obviously a transliteration, whereas Jehovah is a translation. And Bible names generally have been translated rather than transliterated. As you can see, if you dig deep enough, even Jehovah's Witnesses will admit the name Jehovah isn't the most accurate one. And that's when they will start saying that the most important thing is to develop a relationship with God and that the name is not actually that important. But I thought the first thing you needed to do to develop a relationship with God is to know that his name was Jehovah. Ironically, if it wasn't because of Jehovah's Witnesses, then the term Jehovah would have probably already gone completely out of favor. Jehovah's Witnesses are the main religion that is still pushing a fake name for God as the real thing. 4. The blood doctrine. Every Jehovah's Witness will tell you that they would never ever use or consume any blood in any way, shape, or form. Not only do they check at the supermarket that the meat isn't the kind that has blood, they all carry a card like this one that says that they will not accept a blood transfusion under any circumstances, even if they need it for medical emergencies. And you don't even have to be a Jehovah's Witness or an adult to do that. There are countless children who, even though they aren't baptized and therefore are not counted among Jehovah's Witnesses, still die if they need a blood transfusion to save their lives because their parents will make that decision for them, forcing them to die for a religion that they are technically not even a part of. This religion takes it so seriously that it has teams of elders everywhere in the world working around the clock who will arrive to any hospital where there's a Jehovah's Witness in danger of getting a blood transfusion so they can defend their right to die against their doctors. Their excuse is the fact that the blood prohibition found in the Mosaic Law is also found in the New Testament. It says so right here, they will say. Acts chapter 21, verse 25. As for the believers from among the nations, we have sent out, rendering our decision that they should keep themselves from what is sacrificed to idols, as well as from blood, and what is strangled, and from fornication. They will claim the Bible directs them to avoid blood and strangled animals with coagulated blood, just as they avoid fornication. And that's what the verse is saying here, right? Well, no, it's not, because here Paul was simply invoking the 4 requirements to go to the temple: to abstain from idolatry, from fornication, from unclean meat, and from murder. He was invoking those to try to reach an understanding between traditional Jews and new Christians. Like he said, he would never eat meat in front of someone who wasn't okay with it. Not because he was wrong, but because he didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Based on this verse in Acts, you can ask Jehovah's Witnesses if they would also avoid eating meat sacrificed to idols. And they will immediately tell you that yes, that's what they should do, since it's forbidden, just like blood. But it's not. Paul makes it clear when he writes, everything that is sold in a meat market, keep eating, making no inquiry on account of your conscience. For to Jehovah belong the earth and that which fills it. If any one of the unbelievers invites you and you wish to go, proceed to eat everything that is set before you, making no inquiry on account of your conscience. So, based on this, what do you think Paul would say if he was asked if they needed to check on the markets if the meat has blood or not? And the Mosaic Law was simply a law to respect life. After all, if you're in the wilderness, how can you know that whatever animal you just hunted and killed and you're about to eat is dead before you start butchering them? Back then, the only reliable way was to drain their blood before butchering. This showed respect for life, since it highlighted the importance of not prolonging suffering unnecessarily. If you had to take the life of an animal, you should do it quickly and respectfully, giving it a quick and peaceful death and ensuring that it was dead before you started butchering it. But what would the punishment be for someone who violated this law not on purpose, but because they simply couldn't bleed out the meat? Say you get the meat in a market and you're not sure, or you find some delicious deer roadkill that you want to eat. Well, given the importance of the law for Jehovah's Witnesses, you'd think that this would also be a matter of life and death for the Israelites, right? After all, they stoned minors for being too rebellious back then. So what was the consequence for violating this law? Well, it's right here in the next verse. If anyone, whether a native or a foreigner, eats an animal found dead or one torn by a wild animal, he must then wash his garments and bathe in water and be unclean until the evening. Then he will be clean. That's it. You just went away for one day to take a bath. That was the punishment. If an Israelite was hungry and wanted to eat some dead animal they found, all they needed to do was to take a day's break. And yet, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that letting children die in situations of emergency where they need to have blood, not because they want to eat it like they would with meat, but because they need it for a medical procedure, is somehow honoring life. 3. Current generation teaching. The leadership of this religion thinks their millions now living will never die once there weren't enough people alive for that to become a reality. Instead of admitting that they got it wrong, they gaslit people and told everyone that in the Bible, the term generation means not just anyone who saw the events of 1914, but also all of their contemporaries. That means that the generation got extended to anyone who was old enough to interact with anyone alive by 1914. To put it simply, they decided one generation is actually 2 generations. That's why their whole the end is near doctrine revolves around. You know it's the end of the world because 1914 is when the last day started, and the generation that interacted with the generation that saw those events isn't dead yet. Otherwise, they have no way of proving that we are in the last days. Except, well, that's definitely not how a generation works. Not here, not in biblical times, not ever. We could spend more time talking about this contradiction, but honestly, I've never met a Jehovah's Witness who believed this, even when I myself was a Jehovah's Witness. Most would rather just deflect and say something about not knowing the day or the hour or serving Jehovah not for dates rather than directly talk about this doctrine. 2. You can wait until the start of the Great Tribulation. Many Jehovah's Witnesses are on the fence on whether to leave their religion or not, because what if they momentarily leave only to find out that the Jehovah's Witnesses are right when they see Armageddon coming? Well, luckily, that's no longer the case, because now you can wait on the sidelines and only join the Jehovah's Witnesses once you see and have proof that the end of the world is happening.
So let's think about some that we know, perhaps unbelieving relatives, disfellowshipped ones, others that have heard the message, perhaps studied with us. Could some of them, once they see the destruction of Babylon the Great, decide that what Jehovah's Witnesses were saying is correct after all? Could they take a stand for the truth? Well, if they changed their hearts and joined us, would we be disappointed?
Now, if you're really worried about not being square with Jehovah before Armageddon, you know that it can't come until all other religions are destroyed, and even people who have been kicked out of the religion will have time enough to convert after that. There's no rush to join the Jehovah's Witnesses. You can just wait until you have proof and you see the fulfillment of prophecy to get saved from Armageddon and into the Jehovah's Witnesses. 1. The evil slave. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they need to listen to what these guys say because they are the channel that God is using to communicate with them. They are the faithful and discreet slave from this prophecy. Every other religion will tell you that this is a parable, not a prophecy, but the Jehovah's Witnesses know that when Jesus asks who is the faithful and discreet slave that the master appointed over his domestics to give food at the proper time, He is talking about these guys who feed the domestics, which is us, with spiritual food, which is boring videos. Except Jehovah's Witnesses never read the verses just after. In these verses, Jesus warns about the faithful and discreet slave turning evil and getting kicked out by the master when he arrives for not taking care of the domestics. They cannot even address these verses because these verses break their whole doctrine. After all, if the faithful and discreet slave turn evil, how would Jehovah's Witnesses know? That's a question I made in one of my very first YouTube videos because there's no answer that leaves a religion in a good light. After all, originally, this was interpreted as being fulfilled because the Jehovah's Witnesses printed the Watchtower in so many languages twice a month. That was awesome spiritual food. But the current governing body has pretty much canceled that and almost all other printed media. The governing body doesn't even produce spiritual food anymore. Russell and Rutherford wrote almost everything their followers read, and when they didn't, they made it clear who did. Nowadays, the governing body doesn't write anything anymore. They simply tell Jehovah's Witnesses in the writing department what to write about. The faithful and discreet slave doesn't make spiritual food anymore. It tells the domestics to make their own food. And this giant contradiction is literally next to the Bible verse that the leadership uses to claim that you need to follow them. It's right there. The faithful and discreet slave can become the evil slave if he punishes the domestics instead of feeding them. This governing body not only has stopped making spiritual food, they keep changing and flip-flopping rules and insist that people follow their own made-up rules instead of the Bible. We just spent the whole video proving that. If the faithful and discreet slave turned evil, how would a Jehovah's Witness know? I have long said that you don't need to see any apostate information to realize that Jehovah's Witnesses cannot be the true religion. All you need is to check their own doctrine. Because the Jehovah's Witness doctrine is so flawed and obviously inspired by humans and not God, that it contradicts itself down to their core beliefs. And that's why I broke out of my Caleb and Sophia show, to grow up and show you how to debunk every Jehovah's Witness belief. Not because I don't like them, but because they simply and fundamentally make no sense.